So I'm going to just begin by welcoming everyone to this conversation with Dr. Cooper on her talk, as you can see, entitled Imagining Black Muslim History in Newfoundland and Labrador, Searching for the Invisible One. Thank you, Dr. Cooper, for agreeing to participate and for generously engaging with us in the months that have preceded this talk. As is our custom at Memorial, I'll begin by respectfully acknowledging the territory on which we gather at the St. John's campus as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk and the island of Newfoundland as the ancestral homelands of the Micmac and Beothuk. We also recognize the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatkavut and the Innu of Nunatsiatsinan and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. We strive for respectful relationships with all these people in our province as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation and honor this beautiful land together. So it's my great honor to introduce Dr. Cooper to you tonight. She is a prolific public scholar. She's a professor of history and sociology and social anthropology at Dalhousie University. She's the chair of the scholarly panel on Lord Dalhousie's relationship to race and slavery. She's the former James Robinson Johnson Chair in Black Studies. She founded the Black Canadian Studies Association, which she currently chairs, and also founded the Dalhousie Black Faculty and Staff Caucus. She's a board member of the Women's Health Organization International and of the Jamaican Cultural Association of Nova Scotia. She's a Portia White Prize winner, and from 2018 to 2020, she was Halifax's Poet Laureate. Dr. Cooper is also the author of 12 books on history, poetry, fiction, and children's literature. Her groundbreaking book on Canadian slavery, The Hanging of Angelique, The Untold Story of Slavery in Canada and the Burning of Old Montreal, was nominated for the Governor General's Award. On behalf of my colleagues at Memorial University, my students in the Muslim Lives and Narratives in Newfoundland and Labrador project, and friends in the Anti-Racism Coalition of Newfoundland and Labrador, I'm really thrilled she's with us tonight. As I mentioned, this talk is being recorded and will be featured on the Muslim Lives and Narratives in Newfoundland and Labrador website. And that project is a community-focused project that aims to create and populate a public archive on Muslim lives in Newfoundland and Labrador. And certainly Dr. Cooper's talk tonight, we expect will make evident that this history may go back centuries. So we'll hear from Dr. Cooper for about 20 or 25 minutes. And then Dr. Aisha Sulia-Kinturk, a postdoctoral fellow in religious studies, will offer a brief response, followed by Dr. John Sandlow. So thank you both for being here, who's a professor in history at MUN. And then we'll open up for questions from you. So you can pose questions by either using the raise hand function on Zoom, or you can just kind of wave madly if you're not able to find that function, or you can type your question in the chat and I will read those questions. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Cooper. We'll pass it over to her.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Great. Thank you, Jennifer, for the invitation, and thanks to Aisha for who will be doing the summary, and to everyone who is in the audience or watching this video. And as it's the title of the talk is Imagining Black Muslim History in Newfoundland and Labrador. And I thought of, as I thought through the presentation, Michael Curtin, he's a historian of the Caribbean, slave rebellions in particular. He has this title of one of his books. It's called Searching for the Invisible Man. And so I sort of felt like Michael Curtin, searching for this invisible man or woman. So my subtitle of the talk is a riff on that book title. So imagining, conceptualizing, and theorizing a history of Black Muslims in Newfoundland and Labrador and the wider Canada is an important endeavor. And with this preliminary discussion, I hope to engage that task. Looking historically for Black Muslims in the region is like, as I've said before, searching for the invisible one. But where do we turn to begin such a project? Because I'm a historian. I work primarily in the 18th and in the 19th century. So I look for people in those centuries and even pushing it and going farther into the 17th century. Methodologically, we could explore the Black history of the region to tease out, if possible, evidence of a Black Muslim presence. Additionally, we could do an overall exploration of Muslim history in Canada, or we could probe the history of Islam in the Americas during the period of enslavement. So I'll approach it from those three angles. In recent times, the literature on the history of Black Muslims in the United States, Brazil, and the Caribbean, and also places like Central America, Panama, has expanded tremendously, thanks to the pioneering work of scholars like Alan D. Austin, Michael Gomez, Sylviane Diouf, Abdullah Hakim Quick, Paul Lovejoy, João José Reyes, Sultana Afroz, Amina MacLeod, Yassine Dadi Adoun, and others. Work on Black Muslim history in Canada, and in this case, Newfoundland and Labrador, is embryonic. We could safely say that there is not a field of Black Canadian Muslim history at present time. Even in current sociological studies on Muslims in Canada, as Fatima Jackson Best informs us in her 2019 article, there is a dearth of literature on the Black Canadian Muslim experience. Historians inform us that about 10 to 15 million captive Africans landed alive in the New World during the period of the transatlantic slave trade. So from about 1550 to 1850, certainly the trade was abolished in Brazil in 1850, but we know illegal trading happened after that. For upwards of 4 centuries, 10 to 15 million captive Africans landed alive. And of course, landed alive is, important part of the sentence because so many people, millions died, perished during the Middle Passage journey. That's the Atlantic Ocean as these slave ships crossed. Michael Gomez, as historian on the Muslim presence in the Americas, notes that at least 1/3 of all enslaved Africans who arrived in the Americas were Muslims or came from Islamically oriented societies. Using these estimates, that would be around 3 to 5 million people who were Muslim, captive Muslims. Sylviane Diouf gives a more conservative number of about 1 million, but whatever the number you want, and this shows that the research is still in progress. People are still doing the work. There's nothing conclusive, but we could safely say that millions of Muslims arrived. Out of this vast number, some of these captives ended up in Canada, and they were coming from all corners, from the 13 American colonies before they revolted and became the United States. They were coming from Bermuda, the West Indies, the Maritime provinces, Maritime Canadian provinces, Central and South America, and from Africa itself. And so we know that the first Muslims, the first people who practiced Islam in these Americas were Africans, were enslaved Africans. The first Ummah in these Americas were formed by enslaved Muslims, and also some free Black Muslims, because in places like Trinidad, so many people bought their freedom, and the Muslims bought their freedom and established, a Jamaat and were able to practice their religion in freedom. But overall, overwhelming majority were enslaved people. Doing an exhaustive perusal of research of various provincial censi, or I guess we could say censuses, from the founding colonies and Newfoundland, from say around 1840 to way up to, let's say, 1951, would probably not yield the religious affiliation of Blacks who were remunerated. The usual religious affiliations, when you look at mid-19th century Sensei and Sensei up into the 20th century, when Black people claimed a religious affiliation, it was usually Methodism, various forms of Methodism, British Wesleyan, for example, Congregational Baptist, and some Episcopalian. If we were to, I think we would be hard pressed to find individuals who would claim an Islamic religious identity, given the pressure and sometimes coercion to convert to Christianity. Sometimes people simply hid their religious affiliation. And think of the brutality of slavery. Think of the harsh conditions that enslaved Africans endured from Canada to Argentina. And if many of them were Muslims, it would be hard for them to practice. And if they were practicing, many would be doing it in secret. We know that Ibrahim Rahman Jallo from Guinea, he practiced. He would pray, make his prayers in the woods. Ibn Suleiman Jallo from Senegal, he also would be praying in the woods, hiding his practice of Islam. But what have we learned from the American, Caribbean, and Brazilian experience? When we look at the sources for these histories, from South and the United States, South America and United States, we find petitions, we find letters, we find oral traditions, we find narratives, we find government documents, we find court and legislative records to provide insight on the Muslim presence in the Americas. With respect to Canada, we have two intriguing autobiographies written by men with an Islamic heritage. The first document we have is Nicholas Said from what is today Nigeria. He wrote his autobiography. And he's interesting because Nicholas Said did not come through the transatlantic slave trade. He came through or went through the trans-Saharan slave trade. He was a learned man. He came from a very devout Muslim family in the Borno Empire. He studied with various teachers. He studied Quran, he studied Hadith, he studied Tafsir. He studied a lot of the traditional Islamic disciplines that if you come from a learned family, you will study, whether you're a man or a woman for that matter. And Said was captured during a war that was fought in his homeland. He was taken across the Sahara. He was taken into what is now Libya as a slave captive. He was sold to various African Arabs who later sold him to various officials of the Ottoman Empire. At that time, the Ottoman Empire was the dominant power in parts of North Africa. So he ended up with Ottoman officials and then made a journey to Constantinople or to Istanbul, present-day Istanbul. And in Istanbul, he came to the attention of a Russian prince who was also a general in the Russian army. This last owner, this prince who proved to was his last owner, who was also called Nicholas Trubezkoi, insisted that Said, Muhammad Ali Said, convert to Christianity. And the brand of Christianity was the Eastern branch of the church, Orthodox Christianity. And when he converted, his name was changed. He got the name of his owner, Nicholas. He kept his last name, so he became Nicholas Said. And he served this Russian nobleman. By then, he's speaking like 5, 6 languages. The Russian nobleman insisted that he learn to speak French. He could speak Arabic. He could speak Turkish. He could speak his own mother tongue of Kanuri. He spoke Hausa. Now he was learning French. He spoke German. And he also made the Hajj. He also made the Hajj when he was in the employ of one of the Ottoman officials. So he eventually earned his freedom and landed in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. What a journey. This man saw lands on 5 continents. I mean, his wanderings rivaled that of Ibn Battuta. He ended up in Ottawa. He was robbed of his money. Someone told him to go to Detroit in the United States because the person said there are lots of Blacks in Detroit and maybe you'll be able to make a life, a living. Got to Detroit, ended up joining the American Union Army, fought in the Civil War, and later on became a teacher. He was very concerned at the plight of Black children. American slavery ended in 1865, and he wanted to do his best in uplifting his race, as he put it. And then he wrote his autobiography. So he spent some time in Canada, so he's on our radar. Then there is his book, The Autobiography of Nicholas Said. Then we have Mohamed Gardo Bakwakwa. He never changed his name. He remained Mohamed Gardo Bakwakwa until the day he died. He came from present-day Benin, the northern part of Benin. He too was captured in a slaving raid, ended up in slavery in Brazil, was able to escape, found his way in New York City, was sponsored by some people from the Baptist Church, and then he ended up in Chatham, Ontario, where he wrote his autobiography. An interesting narrative biography of Muhammad G. Bakwakwa. And that book today has been reissued and edited by Paul Lovejoy and Robin Law. However, I'd like to point out, I'd like to introduce to you rather, Richard Pierpoint. Richard Pierpoint was a Black loyalist soldier. He also fought in the War of 1812. And he didn't write a narrative, didn't write his autobiography, but he wrote a petition. In 1821, at the age of 77, he wrote a petition to the governor of Upper Canada, Sir Peregrine Maitland, asking to be returned to Senegal. And he gives, from this petition, he gives a small biography of his life. He was born in Bondu in Senegal. At the age of 16, he was captured. He was stolen into slavery. Then he joined the Loyalists. The American Revolutionary War happened. He joined the Loyalists. He gained his freedom. He came over to live in present-day Ontario, first in St. Catharines, and then in Fergus, Ontario, where he died. So he's a British supporter. And he tells us that he's from Bondu, as I've said. Now, as an old soldier in 1821, he's requesting that the government send him back to Futa Torah. Was he a Muslim? He came as 16 years old. In his culture, he would have been an adult at the age of 16. He would probably was engaged to be married. At that age, you're going to be married. At that age, as a boy coming from the theocracy of Bondu was a theocracy, he probably could have been a Hafiz or certainly well-trained in Quranic science. The governor of Upper Canada didn't send him back to Senegal because he was a veteran of 2 wars at least. He was given land and he died in 1838. Now, I'm wondering, this desire to go back to Bondu, was it because Richard Pierpoint wanted to practice his religion? That's a thought, that's an idea. This man had been living in North America for 60 years, and here at the age of 77, he has this longing, this desire to go back home. David and Peter Myler wrote a book about him. It's called Richard Pierpoint, Searching for Richard Pierpoint, A Stolen Life. And this is, a copy of the petition. And I highlighted there that Your Excellency's petitioner is a native of Bundu in Africa. Bundu is in Senegal. And he gives his, he was made a prisoner in 1760. He's sold to a British officer. He served the king during the War of Revolution and again during the War of 1812. He actually helped raise the corps during the War of 1812 of colored pioneers to fight for Canada/Britain during that war. And so he wants to be settled near Gambia or Senegal in that region, and from whence he said he could return to Bandu. It touches your heart because it speaks to the tragedy of slavery and of enslavement, that at 16, he lost everything that was near and dear to him. And even though he built up a community of Black people in Upper Canada, he still longed to return to his homeland. So that's one way we can get to the history of Black Muslims in Newfoundland and Labrador by looking at the larger picture of Muslims within the Americas. And then here is if we look at the Black history of the region, the total Black history, then we come upon some, what I call, this is more than breadcrumbs. This is like huge. This is a skull and mandible of WH. This was discovered in a couple of decades ago. This meaning the head, the bones, the skeleton, jutting out of a sandbank, which was a cemetery from Lanceloup in Labrador. Upon further analysis, it was discovered that the person, the skeleton, was about 28 years old, was an African man or a Black man, and was involved in naval work. His uniform, the uniform that was on the skeleton, was fully intact, looked almost brand new. And the uniform is now at the Rooms Museum in St. John's, Newfoundland. And the skeletons are at Memorial, the bones are at Memorial University in a big jar. It's WH. Don't know what WH means. Those initials were kind of carved in the sole of his shoes. So here we have a Black man, or the skeleton of a Black man in Labrador. To figure out what he's doing in Labrador, we turn to the sea. Naval Black men were employed in all kinds of naval and maritime occupations during the centuries under discussion. They were fisher folk, they were sailors, they were whalers. Some of them were enslaved, some of them were free. At least 30% of the American Navy, merchant marine, was comprised of African-American men, and likewise the British Navy. And we had whalers and other seamen Black seamen coming from Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. Another intriguing bit of evidence with respect to slavery, here we have this ad in 1794 put in the newspaper by Michael Wallis, who was a Nova Scotia politician, and he said, "My slave has escaped. He goes by the name of Belfast, sometimes Bill, and we think he's gonna jump on a ship and go to Newfoundland." That's a discussion why Newfoundland we can have later on. We also know that Newfoundland was involved in building slave ships for the British slave trade. The slave ship Sarah was built in Newfoundland in 1788, and she was built for Bristol businessmen who were involved in the triangular trade, which is this commercial system that took manufactured goods to the African coast, exchange those for captive human beings, then take these captives to the Americas And again, they were exchanged for tropical goods, sugar, molasses, rum. And we can talk about how Newfoundland and Labrador, how their histories are entwined with the histories of sugar, molasses, rum within the Caribbean history. So this ship, the Sarah, it's linked to Newfoundland, it's linked to Bristol, it's linked to Kingston, Jamaica, and it's also linked to Nigeria and Cameroon, because that's where she went and picked up her slave cargo. So those are some intriguing bits of evidence from Newfoundland and Labrador itself. The Bondu keeps coming up in the history of enslavement in the Americas, of Black enslavement in the Americas. This is this very beautiful portrait taken. This man actually sat for his portrait. Ibn Suleiman Jallo, the person who wrote about it, calls him a high priest of Bonda in the country of Africa. He was from Bandu. He was from the Upper Senegal River area. He came from a family of Talibs. His families were all sheikhs. They were all Talibs. He ended up in the slave trade, landed in Maryland, and because of his literacy in Arabic, he came to the attention of important people. He was able to leave Maryland, go to England. He was bought out of slavery. He went to England in around 1730, learned the English language, and began working for Hans Sloane, who is this person who started the British Museum. And Ayub ibn Sulman Jallo was there translating documents from Arabic into English for Hans Sloane, stayed in England for about 3 years, kept writing letters to the authority that he wanted to return home, and he was able to do so and was actually reunited with his family. His father had died by then. Nonetheless, his dream came true. When he sat for this portrait, his dress, he dressed deliberately, as was stated of him, in the dress of his country. You notice the turban, you notice the gown, which is called a bubu in West Africa, and around his neck would be that pendant or the amulet. Within it, when you open it, would be verses from the Quran. He was fortunate enough, he was able to keep up his practice of Islam in England and in Maryland. And then perhaps this is perhaps the most famous American enslaved Muslim we know of, Omar ibn Said, also from Bondu, also from the Bondu region. He wrote his autobiography in Arabic. It's the only known autobiography that we have that's written in Arabic. He also wrote a series of work on history and theology, and I mentioned his autobiography, which he wrote in 1831. He was a scholar, and he talks about doing the Hajj while he was still living in Senegal. He talked about going to different places to study under various sheikhs. He too was captured in a war and taken to the Americas, in his case, North Carolina, where he died. He lived to be an old age, and he died in 1864. Said, at the beginning of his autobiography, he begins with Surah Mulk. And it's by then, apparently, and this has been questioned, he had converted to Christianity. Those who supported him, there were missionaries who said, you should convert to Christianity. But people are now debating that by looking at his autobiography that was written after he supposedly converted to Christianity. Surah Mulk is important. It's the 67th surah of the Quran, and it begins, I'm just going to read 2 lines or 3 little verses. Blessed is he in whose hand is the dominion, and he is most capable of everything, and that is God, Allah. He is the one who created death and life in order to test which of you is best indeed. And he is the Almighty, all forgiving. He's the one who created 7 heavens, one above the other. You will never see any imperfection in the creation of the most compassionate. So look again. Do you see any flaws? So beginning saying God has dominion over all things, I think in a way of sort of challenging his slave master, saying, you think you have dominion over all things, but the Almighty has. That's my interpretation. So he opens his autobiography with Mulk, and he ends it with Nasir, which is a surah called the Help. You know, when the Prophet Muhammad was in deep distress and he felt, you know, the world was against him and nothing was going in his way. And the surah was revealed like, oh, Muhammad, you know, I looked after you. I found you an orphan. I help you. You will see people entering the religions in droves. This is what Omar ibn Said ended his autobiography with. So I think within him, in his interior, I mean, remember the man was a scholar. He came at the age of 38 to America in slavery. He in my mind, interiorly lived and died a Muslim. So we'll go on. And I should say his papers, there are 14 documents, have been collected and archived by the Library of Congress in 2017. And that's a huge thing. So it gives us more insight and more material to do this history. This is what he wrote in captivity, a copy of Mulk. This is a woman of Bandu in Senegal. And I end with Dembo Suckles, who are the Muslims in Atlantic Canada. Dembo Suckles was an enslaved man who came with his loyalist owner from Rhode Island to Prince Edward Island after the American Revolutionary War. The name Dembo tells us that he's from Senegambia. He's from Gambia, he's from Senegal. He's either a Mandinka or he's a Fulani, or he could be Wolof. Dembo, you go to Gambia, you go to Senegal, every third boy you meet will be called Dembo. And here this man was able to preserve this name in enslavement, and he died with this name on the island of Prince Edward. So since we're imagining, let us imagine, given the harshness of enslavement, were Muslim men and women able to practice the tenets of their religion? We say yes, to some degree. The first pillar of Islam was easy enough to do. It's the recitation of the Shahada. There's no God, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. There's no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet and messenger. You could say that to yourself. You could say that, you know, you could whisper it. No one need to hear. The Salat, could you do the Salat, the second pillar? That was a bit difficult, especially if you have a harsh master and there are all kind of forces against you. But we know some people did. Giving alms and zakat, the third pillar, it could be done, and we know some people did it, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Fasting, the fourth pillar, which is Psalm, it could be done. We know Muhammad Kaaba of Jamaica fasted under this guise. The fifth pillar, pilgrimage, Hajj, could be done, but very difficult unless you made it before you were captured, or after capture, you were free and you would be able to go to Mecca. We know many men and women held up, they were steadfast in not consuming pork or alcohol or engage in fornication. And what about the women? Because I'm talking about men. Well, we know that women were part of the community. Mohammed Kaaba of Jamaica, he wrote a manuscript called Kitab al-Salat, and he addressed it to believing men and women. He said, this book is for the believing men and women of Jamaica. So clearly there were women in the community. And Mohammed Kaaba, he wrote that book in Arabic. João José Reis, in his work on the Bahia uprising in Brazil, also talks about women, enslaved African women, free African women, taking part in community life and in the rebellion itself. So I end there. I'll end on that note, and also with the intriguing possibility that Dembo Suckles of Prince Edward Island could have been a Muslim. He could have continued his practice, could have been a Muslim in disguise. We don't know, but his name gives us a hint of an Islamic heritage. So the work continues for the exploration of this history in Newfoundland and Labrador, and it's Black History Month. And I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Cooper. I'm going to turn now to Dr. Kinturk.
Well, again, thank you so much, Dr. Cooper. This was such a fascinating presentation, and I was moved on so many different levels as a Muslim living in Newfoundland and Labrador, and also as a scholar, as an academician interested in the history of Muslims in Canada, but more particularly in Newfoundland and Labrador. And I really look forward that our project, our ongoing project, Muslim Narratives and Lives in Newfoundland and Labrador, will be a great way to collaborate with you in the future and find out that invisible one, the Black Muslim Newfoundlander and Labradorian. Thank you again for sharing your preliminary findings and your methodology. I was particularly impressed by the story of Omar ibn Said, who kind of had to self-identify, probably not as a Muslim, but in his autobiography, he gave very interesting clues about how he kept his faith. And you also, to me, the most difficult and the most challenging part is to find out whether these Black Muslims were really able to keep their faith, were able to practice it. You listed the 5 pillars of Islam, and out of these 5, I'm pretty sure that if they felt really, kept their religion to themselves, they were able to practice Shahada, fasting, and even Salah, because as a Muslim, I know that under very harsh conditions, there are some exceptions, and you can, for the sake of survival, you can do things differently. You don't need to do them explicitly in public. So I'm really grateful for all this interesting information. And for the sake of time, I will not speak too much. I will just pass on to Dr. John Sandlos and then to the audience for their questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aisha.
Thank you, Aisha. Go ahead, John.
Okay, I will also keep my comments brief. I just want to check, is everybody hearing me? Everybody, people can hear me? Good. Dr. Selby asked me to come and speak with you, and I just want to say thank you so much for the talk, Dr. Cooper. I have admired your work. I guess we can say out here, and if I'm in Newfoundland, it's not that from afar, but maybe not that far from where you're based right now. And I'm glad to see that you're pushing forward the field of African history in Canada, because I designed a course in the summer, and I think I will be the first one to teach the topic in the history department at Memorial. And admittedly, I am learning as I go, because I do a lot more work with Indigenous history and environmental history, but the learning curve has been awesome. So I just had a couple of quick comments that are, one is meant to be helpful, and one's just sort of I guess an arrow shot out to the sea, so to speak, in terms of just an interesting point that I would just be interested if you're following up on it. So the first one is that
Okay.
I wonder if you may find, I don't know if you've been in touch with the Maritime History Archive, but given that you were focusing somewhat on sailors, crews of ships, you mentioned whalers and so on, if there might be something at Memorial's Maritime History Archive that would be useful to you in terms of, they have crew lists there, crew agreements and so on. And I don't know of anybody who's done, I mean, I've been around the maritime historians that have worked with that stuff, but I've never really heard people talking about slavery or race a lot. But actually, the person to talk to in our department about that would be Neil Kennedy, who I do think does merge those fields quite well. And that might be somebody who would be helpful to you. The other thing, the sort of arrow shot out to the sea, so to speak, was I'm just wondering, like, this might be more broadly, given the sort of backgrounder that you sent around, I'm just wondering if a sort of later iteration of Islam ever found its way more broadly into Atlantic Canada. I'm possibly, we can't know yet for Newfoundland, but I'm just wondering if the Black nationalist movement from the United States had any influence. I'm thinking, have an influence in Halifax? Is there any possibility that that could have been, Montreal, places like that? How far and wide did that movement spread in Canada as a sort of, I guess, latter day expression of Islamic identity? And it was interesting because the individual that who Pierpoint, who longed to go back to Africa, and you were speculating as to whether he was whether he was desiring to connect with his religion. It made me think of that, the kind of the Back to Africa movement, identifying African nationalism through Islam and so on. Just be interested to get your thoughts on that, whether there might be a kind of a 1960s element to all of this work that you're doing.
Yes, thank you, John. Just yesterday, I sent Neil Kennedy an email.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I'm
Great.
waiting to hear back from him because he's really the expert on the maritime, Bermuda, North America, sailors. And I'm in conversation with the folks in Halifax at the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic when I did the work on the West India trade from Nova Scotia to the Caribbean. I did a lot of work at that particular museum, but I will certainly check the Maritime History Archives at Memorial too. There are so many things that are there that we often don't look at. So, Peter Pope, he said, yeah, there were all these slaves running around in St. John's, but then he went off to something else, right? Because that wasn't his focus. So for sure. And I think there's always an Islamic presence. Sometimes it goes underground, sometimes it resurfaces. And then, after the Second World War, with the rise of the Nation of Islam, that was one of, these examples of a resurgence. But even before that time, you had, the whole Noble Drew Ali, you have the Moorish Temple, and some of these these organizations, sometimes they mix it with Christianity or Freemasonry or ancient Egyptian rituals. In many ways, they were also masking Islam because they're in a hostile society, right? The society is hostile to anything that's not, and in some time period, that's not Protestant Christianity, right? So from the 50s, 60s, you do have a flowering of the nation in places like Montreal and Toronto. Would need further work to see if it happened in Halifax. We know the Black Power movement was gaining ground in Halifax in the 60s and 70s. There's this new movie that's come out on Fred Hampton and the assassination of Fred Hampton. And so many Black Panthers were assassinated during the 60s and later. And one of the things that people talk about is that many of the Black Panthers were so attracted to Islam, and they wanted to take on that religion and use it in their social justice revolutionary work. So you're certainly right. I think, and the group that's at MUN, the student group that Jennifer talked about at the beginning, people who are looking at these narratives or looking at these oral stories. I think it's wonderful. And so for me, I think that's a good way of getting into the history, is to begin at the present and start going back and see what's there. Begin with the people who are around, interview them. How did you get here? Why are you here? What brand? And then we can talk about the different schools of thought, the different sects in Islam. Our focus has usually been on, Sunni Islam. But what about Shiites and Ismailis and Nation of Islam and so on and so forth, right? And Sufis, some of these enslaved Muslims who came over that we're talking about, coming from Upper Senegal, they were Sufis, they were Qadariyas that, and a few of them were of the Tijaniya branch. So there were different aspects of Islam that people practiced if they were able to.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I'm opening the floor now. If anyone else would like to pose a question, you can just raise your hand. I'll maybe begin, Dr. Cooper. Thanks for mentioning our project. This is kind of one of the goals that we have is really populating an archive with contemporary materials looking forward. But I wondered if you could respond, if you have advice for us. Here I'm putting on my hat in the work that I do with the Anti-Racism Coalition of Newfoundland and Labrador. One of the elements that we notice here is the anti-Black racism and anti-racism kind of focus is typically focused on a newcomer narrative. And so the idea of a longer history is really completely absent from the imagination, if you will, of Black Muslims in Newfoundland and Labrador. And I wondered if you could, based on your work that you've done in Nova Scotia and in Ontario, if you have any thoughts or ways or advice for us on how to recast that narrative away from solely a newcomer or immigrant retention economic kind of model.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's just to think through the history. When you look at the oftentimes when we talk about Atlantic history, it ends at Nova Scotia, right? Sometimes we remember New Brunswick. Sometimes we remember Prince Edward Island. We often do not remember Newfoundland and Labrador. It's like, oh yes, they're there. So that's the wider context, right? There is this forgetting, and in this forgetting, there's this silencing. And I was saying earlier on, when I gave a previous talk, and I mentioned that WH, this skeleton, these bones, for me, provide a good metaphor for the history of Blacks in Newfoundland and Labrador and in Canada as a whole. This history that's erased until, in the case of WH, something dramatic happens. These bones start jutting out in the sand, and people say, hey, what's that? Those look like human bones. And then we have to go back and we have to rethink, and we have to say, oh my God, here's this Black man, and he was buried here in 1807, or certainly by the time the War of 1812. So it's perhaps realizing that there's so much, we don't know what we don't know, and it's to approach this study with humility and go back to the drawing board and start again. And we can start again. It can be multi-pronged, as I was saying earlier on. We can start with the present. It can be this real jambalaya, You begin with the present, you're working on the past, you're looking at the shipping documents, you're doing everything at the same time, because the dead have a way of speaking to us. I think religious people will say, it's God. When it's God's time, then it has to happen. And I think that the time is now. I really believe that, like, so many things are happening, so many discoveries are being made at the same time. So I'm to, that would be my advice, to begin to start everywhere you have the students and other scholars who are enthusiastic, who are willing, begin at the present, look at the past, have someone go through those shipping records that John just mentioned. And we from these intriguing bits of evidence, we're able to weave a story. You know, Richard Pierpoint's petition to Governor Maitland, he's, you know, I'm writing the governor. I worked for the British Empire for 60 years. I want to go back home. I want to go to Senegal. I need to tell this man something about myself. You know, I was from Bondu. I was from Senegal. I was captured at 16. And I'm reading the document, and he was captured in 1760. I'm thinking, chances are he's a Muslim, you know. So it's these little bits of evidence that we have that we can tell stories, and it will come. These bits of evidence or pieces of evidence will be revealed for Newfoundland and Labrador, I'm sure, as WH just kind of showed up one day, right? Emerged from the sand. The slave ship Sarah, who was taking enslaved people from Nigeria and Cameroons to Jamaica. The enslaved people from Newfoundland, from Nova Scotia, who wanted to get on board ship and go to Newfoundland. All these are pieces of the puzzle that we can put together at some point.
Thanks. We have a question from Mohammed Yafa. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone.
Walaikum salam.
Thank you very much, Professor Afua. I remember once after one of your lectures, I mentioned to you that the history of Africans in North America has been devoid of the role of Muslims or the presence of Muslims in those slave ships. I said that's an area of research that has not been explored enough. And I've forgotten what you said to me, but I think this was the answer I was looking for, or part of the answer. So thank you so very much. I'm really, really happy that you are here tonight to speak to this. So I'm from West Africa myself, and I speak the Mandinga and the Fula language. I just want to address the Dembo. Dembo is originally Mandingo, meaning the big child, and usually a child named Abubakar will be called Dembo. So Abubakar Demba. So the Guinea version is Demba, and the Gambian, Senegambia version is Dembo. And then it found its way into the Fula language. I speak Fula also very, very fluently. So they have Dembo, but Madingos are the ones who are using that language that more. So just for that clarification, because I'm from that area, I know what this is. And I'm also a linguist. So I have some background in that. So the point really I wanted to make to point out is I'm struggling with my fellow Black people here, embracing that Islam is part of Islam was part of the migration, the enslavement that many people that came here, that their ancestors were partly Muslims, not all of them, but that were partly Muslims. Many Black people are running away from embracing that because of the maligned image that Muslims have around the world. Just today, I sent out a very, what I considered a very nice video on Mansa Musa and what he did and who he was, and how expansive his imagination was, and how the rest of the world was below Malian living standard. So he went distributing in his second pilgrimage to Mecca, distributing so much gold that gold became worthless in Egypt. So I usually, when I send things about other things, I get it sent to this wide list that we belong to. This one was just kept silent because there was these little snippets about him being a Muslim and so on and so forth and going to Mecca. One person responded and the response was not as I was expecting. So I'm wondering, have you come yourself across this attitude from Black people trying to shy away from some part of their ancestry? And what would be your comments on that?
Okay, thank you, Imam Yafa. Thanks for being part of this presentation. Glad to see you. And thanks for the clarification around Dembo. Yeah, I know it's a very popular name in that region. And so the point, you know, this man from Prince Edward Island, he was Dembo Suckles, never changed his name. He died with that name. So we can think of him now as Abu Bakr also. There is anti-Black racism, there is anti-Islamophobia, there's also anti-Black Islamophobia. So as Black Muslims, I'm Muslim, I'm Black, you endure the anti-Black racism. You get the anti-Muslim racism from white people, and from Black people too, and from other ethnicities. So, you know, as a Black Muslim, you're squeezed in every direction with these various forms of discrimination. And, you know, the thing is, because Islam, as you said, has been so maligned over the centuries. If we think of the enslaved people who were Muslims, the hardships that they went through to practice, Aisha started when she gave her a summary that, you know, if you're in a terrible condition, if you're going to be beaten and killed and brutalized because of the religion, you're not really under compulsion to be practicing publicly. But so think of what they went through and why so many people would want to convert to Baptist or the Methodist religion. And as we enter the 20th century, there's this pressure to assimilate. If you want to be a respectable person, a respectable Black person, you have to be an Anglican or a Baptist or, you know, a Catholic if you're in Brazil or Maryland or wherever. So there is that pressure. And as European colonization expanded in Africa, in Asia, and in all throughout the Muslim world, you have this, in terms of prestige, this diminishment of Islam. You know, Islam is seen as something backward, something dirty, something inferior, something that oppresses women. And, you know, on the latter point, it's really interesting because before this whole colonial onslaught, Muslim women, wherever in the Muslim world, were some of the most educated people on the planet. So for like the first university in Morocco and maybe in all of Africa was started by 2 Muslim women, right? They got their inheritance and they said, what are we going to do with it? We're going to build a university, right? And they didn't need permission of fathers or husbands. So there was this colonial onslaught on Muslim lands and in Muslim lands and also in Western society. So Black people, in order to be respectable, and they were undergoing all kinds of tribulation within the Western world, lynching, murder, you know, Ku Klux Klan, color bar, Jim Crow, you name it. So to say that you're Muslim wasn't the coolest thing to say. You could be killed, right? You could be killed for just being Black. And no, you're really wanting to assume this heritage that the dominant society say is just, you know, backward and inferior. So as colonized people, we also internalize these ideologies about us, whether it's our Blackness, whether it's our Africanness, whether it's our Islamic heritage. And things got really worse in 1948, right? Things got even more terrible at 9/11. That was when you really saw the onslaught on Muslims within the Western world and within Africa, Asia, and other places. So Black people are human beings like any other people. We have the same kind of psychology. If we don't exhibit consciousness, if we don't enter life or look at life through a critical lens, we are gonna start thinking like that. You have Muslim people who think like that. You know, some of the most Islamophobic comments that some of us heard came from Muslim people. Many Muslim people in this day and age still want to hide You still want to hide that heritage because there's such an onslaught against Muslims in these societies. And in the Black community, you know, you and I live in Nova Scotia. There is this this kind of dominant narrative that every Black person in the province is a Baptist. And I often say, well, it's not true. There are so many people who are Methodist and so many people who are Anglicans. Like historically, the Black people in Digby and Annapolis County are Anglicans. They're not Baptist. And I said, well, outside of that, there are so many people, Black people who are Muslims. And there are so many Black people too who are Buddhist. So it's always challenging this dominant narrative that makes oppressed people feel comfortable. Because they would say, oh, that's another identity. I don't have to take on my identity as a Black person is enough of a despised identity. You know, I don't even want to be Muslim. I don't want to be Buddhist. Mansa Musa, yeah, I can love Mansa Musa, but I'll just erase his Islamic identity. I love him as a great African king. He was so rich, but we won't say that he was a Muslim. We won't say he was going to Hajj. We won't say all these alms he was giving to people. So it is a struggle, but we still have to stand within our consciousness and wisdom, perhaps, and sensitivity, and know the oppression and know the discrimination that Black people overall over these 4 or 5 centuries have endured. At the same time, we have to stand with dignity and with strength and not let people abuse us, you know.
Thanks, Dr. Cooper. We have, we're at time now, but
Okay.
There are a couple of people who had some questions. So I'm just going to quickly turn to them and collect both questions, and then we'll have maybe a quick response from you. So the first person was Hassam Munir. Hassam, are you still there? And the second person was my colleague, Sobia Sheikh, Dr. Sheikh. Do you want to pose your questions, Dr. Sheikh?
Sure. The first one is a comment, and I really appreciated, Dr. Cooper, your conversation about faith and how it could be practiced and the conditions under which things are practiced. There is this idea that practicing Muslims are particularly more Muslim or less Muslim within the Muslim community, and I think that reminding us about the conditions under which Black communities have come to this land is really important. So I appreciate that. My second question is more about your methodology a little bit, and well, maybe a request, I think, is whether, and I think it goes to a couple of the questions already asked about really looking at if the historical record allows you to see both resistance to both anti-Black racism and also to anti-Muslim racisms, and whether that's possible in a historical record, particularly when it's just names. And I think it goes back to Dr. Selby's request, because this idea even in 2021 that there is no anti-racism in Newfoundland and Labrador, that there hasn't been any resistance to it. And I think that it's just, I guess, a request that also be looked at. And I think your work does that. I know your work, so I do know that it does that quite a bit, but just a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Sobia, for those comments. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think what some of our people in the 18th and 19th century did, they were engaging in acts of resistance. If you look at the Mali rebellion in Brazil in Bahia in 1835, they were serious. They were hardcore, right? And their objective was to overthrow the government of Bahia, right? And they were communicating with each other in Arabic. They were writing letters. The leaders, someone would be stationed at this point, the other would be stationed at that point, and they were writing to each other in Arabic. And they would go to other slaves who were not Muslims, and they were, look, we are overthrowing the government, either you're in or you're out. So a tremendous resistance. and it failed. The state reorganized itself and brought out the militias and the armies and the dogs and what have you, and killed people and deported people and that sort of thing. So resistance was always there. In Jamaica, I mentioned Mohammed Kaba, who was from Guinea, and he wrote this book, Kitab al-Salat, he said to believing men and women of Jamaica. He found other co-religionists in central Jamaica and in Kingston. And they would travel from plantation to plantation, preaching, talking about what to eat, how to live, how to carry yourself, how to pray. Even as much as Muhammad Kaba converted to Moravianism. It's so interesting. And so these are tools of survival, but at the same time, telling themselves or acknowledging to themselves that, Islam is great. And I'm still there's this cloak of Christianity that, if I don't convert, I might lose certain privileges. I could even be killed. But resistance was always there. And then not everybody converted. You have people like Mahmoud Yarrow, who maintained his Islam throughout his life. Bilali from Georgia, who was buried with his Quran, who made his 5 prayers every day. That his children came and talked about, he was always saying Allahu Akbar, his children and his grandchildren. So, but the point about inserting resistance there is certainly well taken. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Dr. Cooper. We're all going to virtually clap and thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thank you, guys.
While everyone's here, I wanted to let everyone know this is the first talk in a Gender Studies, Religious Studies joint series of lectures on Black History Month and beyond. And I wanted to let you know about a couple of other things coming up. You can follow the Gender Studies Twitter feed to get more details, but one will be on Tuesday, March 16th, focused on carceral abolition and social justice, a panel featuring Elle Jones, Robin Maynard, and Beverly Bain. And that'll be from 3 to 4 p.m. Newfoundland time. And then another talk on April 5th with Carol Duncan. That's coming up as well. So keep your eyes peeled, everyone. And thank you very much for being here on this snowy night in Newfoundland. And take care, and good night, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.